Hello everyone, this is Canadian immigration lawyer welcoming you back to another Immigration Nation episode. And as always, Immigration Nation right here is designed to showcase the awesome things that immigration lawyers are doing across the country, and most importantly, teach you a little bit about there you go. We are back, and this is an episode that I've been looking forward to doing for quite a while here with my good friend Kyle Hyndman, and I'm going to pull Kyle in. How are you doing, my friend?
Hey, Mark. Hey, everybody.
Awesome. So as you can see, the production value here of our little Immigration Nation slowly, incrementally is getting better each time. But the topic that we're going to talk about today is something that every single lawyer is going to have to deal with at some point in their career, and that's a mistake. Now, those mistakes can encompass a whole bunch of things. It could be something that we actively did wrong. We just didn't provide proper advice, or we missed something. But the reality is, in many cases, it's maybe a staff member that we've entrusted to do something, didn't get it done right. And at the end of the day, we're responsible. It's our responsibility. And Kyle is going to drive the ship on this, and I'm grateful that he's able to share some insight, and hopefully we feel like you guys will get a little bit out of this. But I wanted to start actually, Kyle, telling my own story. So I'm just going to flip back here so that I can get the full picture here. But I want to tell you a story that happened to me, and I'm sure this will resonate with many, many of you out there. So essentially, we were in the situation of filing an in-Canada spousal sponsorship. Sound familiar? Now, it was pre-pandemic, so we didn't have the issue of getting an application returned after 7-8 months, but the application got returned. And what had happened was one of my staff members, we're not exactly sure it happens, like sometimes you just don't know, but somehow one of the forms got submitted without a signature on it. Now, in this situation, it was probably about 2 or 3 months before we got it back, but nonetheless, this client fell out of status because, and I'll give you the backstory here. She was a tanning salon manager, and her husband had actually purchased the tanning salon for her to manage. And she was pretty much the only employee other than a few casual people. And so this tanning salon manager had come up on a swap work permit from the US, an open work permit. And obviously that work permit was getting ready to expire. We quickly got the spousal in with the open work permit, and hey, implied status kicks in, right? Yeah, until it gets returned. And that's exactly what happened. So I think every one of us, if you practice immigration law, you've been in this situation where you've got an application for whatever reason that's been returned, and the stress level is like off the charts. And so for me, this was even worse because it wasn't like, if she wasn't working, the tanning salon was going to have to shut down. And so I think like most, and as Kyle will talk about in our little session today, the first thing we think about is, oh my goodness, what are we going to do? How do I fix this, right? How do I make this right? And I won't get into all the sort of details, but in the end, I got some harebrained idea that maybe I could try a C10 application at the airport. And so they did a little trip down to Vegas, and I was very, very fortunate. We put every possible thing you could imagine in that C10 to justify how she, was creating a significant benefit. And there was evidence to support it. They supported a lot of the local communities and, contributed to the university, and all these things would unravel, and the two Canadians would lose their jobs. And so in the end, the officer had compassion because they knew she was the subject of a spousal sponsorship. So it worked out, but it doesn't always work out that way. And so we all have had those experiences, and those days were some pretty stressful ones for me, because I was even contemplating the fact that maybe I was going to have to pay the salary personally for whoever was going to come in and replace her to keep the tanning salon going. So that's my story. I'll pull Kyle back in. And does that sound familiar, Kyle?
It does, painfully familiar. And I've wondered if doing this session on mistakes was a mistake, because nobody wants to be known as the expert on mistakes.
You are so true. So true. Oh boy.
And I'm not, but we've all been there, every one of us. And none of us like to think about it. None of us like to talk about it, but we have to. And the longer you practice, the more inevitable it is that you're gonna encounter this, and you've got to know how to deal with it. So I appreciate you sharing that example, and I think probably all of us could. And I've been doing this for 20 years. There've been a few real head scratchers over the years, and you deal with them. We're human.
Yeah.
I think we're trained to aspire to perfection, and we have all kinds of systems in place and double checks and second set of eyes on things. But inevitably, after thousands of applications, something's going to break down at some point, and something's going to get missed. So we're human, and we got to deal with it.
Absolutely.
I got to give a huge shout out before we go on, though. The Immigration Nation show is amazing. What you're doing for our profession is amazing. Pushing us into the 21st century with technology, it's great.
Well, Kyle, this stuff would not be nearly as successful as it is if it wasn't for lawyers that are smarter than I coming on and actually sharing wisdom that's worth hearing. So I can get up here as a talking head and blither on, till the cows come home, as we say here in Alberta. And at the end of the day, it's the real content that is king. So I appreciate you coming on to share some thoughts. Absolutely. And this is round 2 for you. Did you know, Kyle, that you were one of the first little experiments that I did? If the viewers here on the YouTube channel scroll down, you'll see we had a previous incarnation where Kyle and I talked about the border and the directives that the officers were originally given as to who could come in and who couldn't. And we had a little bit of fun with that. So it's nice to have you back.
That was fun. Maybe everyone's forgotten that one.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, why don't we get started?
Sure.
I know that the first thing that we talked about was, just a little bit regarding lawyer accountability, right? That drives a lot of our decision making. Do you want to flush that out a little bit for us?
Sure. This is one of the things, not to toot our own horn too much, but one of the things that I'm really proud of about the legal profession, and that is this culture of accountability. Everybody makes mistakes in every job and every profession. But one of the things that I think is really special about the legal profession is this valuing of accountability. And, I want to tell another story about that. And it's not about me, but early in my practice in BC, there was a lawyer who many people in my generation will remember, who got involved in a major real estate transaction, and it went sideways, and he ended up using each successive client's money to discharge the previous client's mortgage, and it ended up being in a big pyramid scheme, and it eventually collapsed, as these things all do, and people were out about $40 million, and this lawyer was disbarred and actually went to prison over it. But the part that I think is really interesting is that the Law Society's special compensation fund chipped in and compensated every one of those clients for $40 million. And every lawyer in BC paid an extra $350 on their Law Society fees for, I think, about 5 years to pay off those clients. And the thing is that I didn't hear anybody complain about it. I didn't hear a single lawyer. I mean, people were angry about this having happened, but no one thought that we shouldn't be compensating those clients as a profession. And I was really proud of that. And I think that speaks to this culture of accountability in the law. I think that's our reputations really depend on that. We can't build our reputations just on never making mistakes, because it's impossible. We build our reputations in part by our integrity in how we deal with these things when they happen. And that's, we can't take these too personally because they're part of being human, but at the same time, that's not to minimize the impact of mistakes in our field. They can be life-changing sometimes for people. And as you said, in your case, thankfully you were able to fix that, but you could see a similar situation where you might not have been able to fix it, and it could have had a big impact on people's lives. So none of this is to minimize that, but at the same time, we can't sort of beat ourselves up about it. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what we do when we make a mistake.
When we screw up.
When we screw up. And some of that's going to be practical, and some of it's just going to be my musings about how I see this culture of accountability playing into this. And maybe you can pull up my slides, not because there's anything that interesting on them, but just because it's probably nicer than looking at my face. Oh, there, you get to look at my face anyway. So, as I said, the first thing to do when you discover a mistake is just take a deep breath. This is going to happen. You're human. It's probably fixable, and panicking about it doesn't help your client either. So calm down. And the next thing to do, and I think we'll just go through these slides. Mm-hmm. Thank you. I think, when you talk to your client or whoever else you need to talk to about this, the first thing is you need to know what happened and why, because your clients are going to want answers. Whether you need to talk to your insurer, they're going to want answers. So spend some time, even if that means putting aside other things that you're working on, go through your file, figure out as best you can what happened and why. Maybe we can go forward to our next slide. Yeah, okay. So the next thing is we've got to figure out who we need to talk to. And the first one on my list is the insurer. And that's one that people dread. And I think that we should probably dread it a little bit less than we do. The insurer, at least in BC, and I think in most provinces, is separate from the Law Society in that their interest is in protecting you and protecting lawyers from financial liability, whereas the Law Society's interest is in protecting the public. And so the insurer, in a way, is on your side. And another reason to contact the insurer right away is that, for the most part, our policies, our errors and omissions policies, require that we do, and they may not cover us if we don't report immediately. So in BC, you have to report if you've made an error or if there's any prospect of litigation or a claim against you. And that's sometimes hard to judge, and sometimes you don't know if there's any prospect of a claim until you try to fix it. The insurer will take a pretty aggressive stance there and say, just always report. I think in reality, many of us look at a case first and see if there's a simple fix first before we'll call the insurer. But at the same time, I've had to contact the insurer maybe a couple of times in 20 years, and it's been less scary than I expected it to be. Insurers were very practical. They didn't panic. They didn't throw the book at me. They also didn't stonewall and try to deny what had happened or anything like that. They were practical and they were helpful. And we were able to resolve the client's issues. And I think in one case, they told me there was no claim and don't worry about it. And in another case, they gave me some practical advice on how to get out of the situation, and we were able to. So calling the insurer, I think, is it's a judgment call, but I would be maybe less scared of it than many lawyers are. I don't know, Mark, do you have any experience with that, or any sense of how you would approach that?
Well, it's interesting. I've had one experience where I did needed to reach out, and it was a strange situation. It was a transition from one firm to another. I was a partner in one firm, and I had left that firm, but the associate was originally on maternity leave who had managed the first file, and it was a parental sponsorship. And it was in the queue for 3-4 years, and I had no clue that it even existed, to be honest. But when the firm kind of imploded, then all those files were just given to me, and I had no idea that one of them was an active file. So in the end, I had to reach out, and then fortunately, the problem was able to be resolved. But I was thinking, my goodness, like even in this situation, I had no clue, but I still needed to make the call. And
and was that a good experience? Or?
It was positive. Yeah, it was. Yeah. Like the insurer was, they understood. And so they, at the end of the day, they gave me some advice. They said, see what you can do. They actually told me to see what steps you can take to kind of resolve it. And fortunately, immigration allowed that particular individual to get it put back in the queue. And so, you throw yourself under the bus, and sometimes it works out, but definitely. Stressful for sure. But in the end, it was not nearly as bad. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So other people you might need to call. I mean, the Law Society, I think it's rare that you would need to self-report to the Law Society for an error. Usually that's if it's something involving money, if it's something involving a trust account, something like that. If it's an error in a file, usually the insurer is the first place to go, and they'll direct you what you need to do. So the Law Society in more exceptional situations. Partners or employer, sometimes I think if you've created a potential liability for your firm, that's a place you need to go if you're practicing in a firm. But I think the insurer is probably the first place to go. Once you've dealt with these groups of people, the next person you need to do, obviously, is to talk to your client. And this is sort of the most important conversation, I think. And that goes back to figuring out what's happened, because your client's going to want information, and you're going to want to be able to explain to them really clearly what's happened. Now, the first point that I put on this slide, I think is maybe a controversial one, and that's apologizing and taking responsibility. And it's controversial for a number of reasons. One reason it's controversial is that most insurers tell you not to do this. The insurer in BC tells you in the don't do this list as number one is don't accept responsibility or liability. I'm a little torn about that for a number of reasons. Everything that I've read about apologies, mostly in the medical context, but in some other contexts, is that there doesn't seem to be a big correlation between apologizing and actually creating a legal liability. In fact, people tend to be less litigious when the person who's injured them has apologized. They don't see that as an opening, an admission of guilt that creates a legal liability. Often what people want is understanding and accountability. And if you provide them with that, many times they're happy to have you fix the problem for them. They don't want to see you go down in flames for it. And so I'm torn about that apology. And I think that apology is part of that culture of accountability that I talked about at the beginning. I think it's really important. And people want to be heard and understood. And if something has happened that has harmed them, they want to be acknowledged. And so, so I think, again, it's a judgment call here.
I'm actually with you, Kyle, on that. And when I saw that bullet point, when you provided me with the slide deck, I thought to myself, there's going to be a lot of our members. And if any of the lawyers are out there, you can post comments. So post a comment, and we'd love to hear where you sit on this. Do you feel like it's just an absolute taboo? You never, acknowledge any error in any way. But for me, it comes down to exactly the same things you were talking about, Kyle. It's super awkward. Like, how do you have a conversation with a client and say, hey, this happened, and it's clear, like, we didn't include the form that we know you signed, but that's just the way it is. And it's a dance that I never ever want to have, where I'm trying to deflect, because all it's going to do is, like you said, is just going to make them more upset. They're already a little disappointed in things. And when you come in and you say, look, this is totally our fault. Like, we made this mistake, and this is what I'm going to do to fix it. And, I think that's way, way more effective. And it's comforting to hear that you've done a little bit of research on what I felt, personally, in terms of that. But yeah, I'm very, very, very clear. Let's see, we've got here, actually, I'm going to pull one up here, and let's see. So this is I'm going to pull this one on here. So this individual says, doesn't the insurer bar lawyers from accepting responsibility lest they refuse coverage? So so
it's a really good question. And some insurers, as I mentioned, they instruct their insured lawyers not to admit liability, and an apology could be seen as liability. But I think, again, you got to use your judgment here. And often, if it's something that's fixable, as I said, the client is happy to let you fix it if you've taken responsibility for it. If you don't take responsibility for it, then often litigation is a way of forcing you to take responsibility for it. What they really want is accountability. They don't want money. And so if you start out with accountability, that's more often than not the end of it.
Yeah.
So yes, you're absolutely right. All the commentators there
Yeah.
who've mentioned that issue about insurance, that's not wrong. But I also think that often you don't even need to go there
Yep.
if
I
you just
agree.
deal with
Right.
it up front.
Where does liability come from? Well, how does it flow? It flows because the client's unhappy and they want justice in whatever form. And when you can kind of diffuse the situation, say, look, I'm really sorry, and this is what's happened. This is the steps we're going to take to fix the problem. They want their permanent resident application approved. They want their work permit extended. You know, they don't want money. So that's one of the differences, I think, with the work that we do as immigration lawyers versus maybe someone who has had a house deal created or something like that.
That's right. I think there is something very distinct in our practice area, that the implications of what we do are human more than they are financial, although sometimes there are financial angles to it. And so often the remedy is a human remedy as well, not a financial remedy. And so, creating financial liability, it doesn't really help your client. And so anyway, maybe I won't get any further into that. I don't want to get myself into trouble, but, but I think.
Hey, I'm in trouble with you too, so it's all good.
Okay. So I think the next thing is when you're talking to your client, as I said, you want to have a clear idea of what's happened, but you also want to have some clear options for the client. How can we fix this? Give the client a number of options on how to fix it. And depending on what those remedies are, it may involve you fixing it, or it might involve you referring them out to independent legal advice, depending on the situation. There may be a situation where you've made a mistake and your client has lost a right of some kind. They've missed a filing deadline. And it may be that the way that they're going to save that is to blame you for your mistake. And that may put you in a conflict of interest and require that it go out to another lawyer to handle. And I think if there's any whiff of conflict of interest, it's the best approach is usually to refer them out. And you may, depending on the situation, want to pay for that independent legal advice. Depends on the situation. But the most important thing, I think, is having a clear set of options, explaining the implications of those options, what the timelines are, what the likelihood of success of each option is, and then put your client back in the driver's seat and let them decide and follow their instructions as best you can.
Sounds good.
Let's see. Oh yeah, the other thing is going very briefly back to this apology is taking responsibility and accountability are really important, but feeling awful and feeling guilty and feeling shame about your mistake don't help your client. And so, yes, we're human and we're going to make mistakes, but keep the focus on your client, keep the focus on what they need and what's happened to them and how to fix their problem, and be as practical as you can about it. Because if you end up just feeling awful about what's happened, it doesn't serve you and it doesn't serve your client, and it probably makes it harder to fix it.
Yeah, that's a good point, because that's the first instinct, right? It's almost like, oh, you're trying to punish yourself for the mistake.
For sure, and it's understandable.
Yeah,
it's understandable, because sometimes, as you said, the consequences can be really, really serious for people.
Yeah.
So it's and we care about our clients. That's one of the things that defines us, is we care about the outcomes for our clients. And so it's hard not to take these things personally. But you can't, because you've got to keep the focus on fixing their problem.
Yeah. And it's interesting too, like immigration has evolved over the last few years, especially with the creation of express entry and really a heavy emphasis on one touch processing. The consequences can be devastating. And I do a lot of express entry, and boy, when you can forget to submit a color copy of a police certificate that gets an application returned for being incomplete, that's okay. That happens. But when that person has had a birthday, they've just lost 5 points, and maybe they're outside of Canada and they're now down to 465 when, the likelihood of them getting another ITA, this is their future in Canada, all because of something like that. And it creates tremendous amount of pressure on us to get it right. And, the whole transformation of my law firm is directly as a result of that. Just being afraid to delegate. And, that's the hard part. So it's a reality for us.
Sure. Absolutely. And not to get too far off topic, but, sort of along the same lines that you're talking about are, the issue of returned spousal applications during the pandemic, where they're getting returned 8-9 months later, by which time people are way out of status, sometimes beyond the restoration period. They're no longer authorized to work. Their kids can't go to school anymore. There can be all kinds of just really, big impacts on people. And it's hard not to feel badly about those things. And we can feel badly, but keep the focus on our clients.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. All right. Did you want to advance to the last one?
Yeah, let's advance from there. So, figure out how to avoid this happening in the future. And the first point there is that you can't. It will happen again, but maybe this specific thing won't happen again. Yeah. I guess number one, I would say, is look at your systems that you have in place. Look at your checks and balances in your practice. Look at your review processes, all of those things, and see if there was something missing, or if you have good systems and they just weren't followed. And if there is a gap in your system, figure out how to fill that gap. The next thing I think is to get help, and there are all kinds of places to get help. Whether it's fixing a specific mistake or just best practices to reduce the risk of mistakes in the future. In BC, it used to be that the practice advisors at the Law Society didn't have a clue about immigration law. And over the last few years, I'm happy to say that has changed. And maybe because more of us are calling them for advice. But I found the practice advisors at the Law Society actually quite helpful on some things in terms of best practices and helping us make sure that our systems prevent errors or reduce errors. So use those practice advisors. I'm sure that they exist in Alberta and other provinces in the same way that they do in BC. The other thing is that the immigration bar, as many of you know, is almost unique in Canada in how collegial and collaborative it is. And I don't know that many immigration lawyers in Canada that I couldn't call up for advice on just about anything. And I think that that's true for most of us. And so if you're struggling with your systems, or you don't know how to fix something, call somebody. Call a senior lawyer if you practice on your own. Talk to your colleagues if you're in a firm. Get help. There's no shame in that. We don't and can't know everything, and we're all constantly learning from each other, just like I'm learning from Mark today how to use this cool technology online. And the same applies to all of our systems.
Yeah. It's interesting, Kyle, when you say that, I think of each time where, I've had something that hasn't gone right. My first inclination is to call a close friend, that's been practicing, and to even just to have someone to talk to, say, oh my goodness, this has happened. What do you recommend? Because, very often the first thing they do is they tell you, hey, it's okay. That's not a big deal. That has happened to me. This is how I've dealt with it. And they kind of walk you back from the ledge a little bit. But yeah, the first instinct is, oh, I need someone to talk to that, and that's the first place that I went every time.
Absolutely. And as you said, it's not just that you'll get practical advice. You'll probably also hear from them that they've been there before.
Compassion.
And absolutely. And, I think that can help you kind of get over yourself and get back to focusing on your client and fixing their problem. Just that reassurance that, okay, this is a thing that happens in your practice, and you try to minimize it and you try to fix it and you get on with it. So yeah, that advice from someone else, and it doesn't even necessarily have to be a senior lawyer, just someone else who's been through it. And if you've never been there yet, you just haven't practiced long enough.
That's true. Yeah. So I don't know, Kyle, do you have some other thoughts at this stage?
Well, those are the main things that I wanted to say, Mark, but I'm happy to chat about any of these in more detail, and happy to respond to any questions or comments from our audience.
Yeah, and we will open it up for questions if anyone does have questions about how to deal with issues, and maybe you've got questions about, a representative that's acting for you, and you've had questions and things have not, developed the way you hoped they would, or even if you're you're a representative yourself and you've got questions, we're happy to give our thoughts on it. But I'm going to ask you, as we transition, Kyle, I'm going to ask you the question. So what do you do when someone comes to you and you can very clearly see that representative has really screwed things up?
Like a former representative, or
former one. Yeah.
Yeah. And
I can tell you, like, I've probably got 25% of my consultations that come to me where people, it's a second opinion, even before the application may be submitted. Or sometimes it's after a refusal has come through, but.
Yeah, that's a really good question, Mark. And it's a tough one because, just as I said, like, we make mistakes, and when a client comes to us, having been represented by someone else where they've made a mistake, I want to be compassionate and understanding about that person as well. We don't know all the circumstances that they've gone into it. Sometimes it's just very clear that a previous representative isn't competent, or in some cases even unethical. And yeah, those are tougher, I guess. And in those cases, again, I try to keep the focus on the client and what's in their best interest, rather than any kind of sort of, whether it's spite or just public interest in making sure that previous counsel is held to account for that. I do try to keep the focus on what's in this client's best interest. How are we going to solve this? How are we going to fix this problem? And it may be that we have to blame certain errors on previous counsel, and it may be that the error is sufficiently serious that we need to report them to their regulatory body, whether if it's another lawyer, we need to go to their law society, or whether it's a consultant or an accountant or some other professional, we need to go to their regulatory body and report them. Of course, that can only be done with your client's instructions. It's their case. They're the ones making the call, and they need to know what will happen or what won't happen if they make a complaint. There have even been cases where I've had to go to the CBSA about a previous representative's behavior. That's pretty rare and pretty disappointing when it happens, but from time to time it will. And I think even to the police once or twice. So, but again, those are usually not errors. Those are
criminal
clearly
activity.
Fraudulent criminal activity. Yeah,
exactly. I know. That's one of the really, really difficult parts is there's been many occasions when I wish I wasn't a lawyer. I'll be honest, where a client has told me something and they don't want to challenge that individual. They just want to move forward with their situation. And I know that individual is going to continue to do to every, the other clients that they have exactly what's been happening to this client. But unless the client gives us express authorization, then there's nothing that you can do.
Absolutely. And I've been there too, where there's been a previous representative where I see a pattern of incompetence. Either they aren't well enough informed, or they're just sloppy. And yes, you absolutely want to report them. But I think not only do you need your client's instructions, but you need your client's informed instructions. What is the process of making this complaint actually involve for them? And what are the possible outcomes if you do?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And I know that's one of the challenges that we face. It's an ongoing challenge. I'm just going to pull this up here. Let's see here, get the right one. So this is this question. What about, for example, you go to a representative and they make you lose your dream because he makes a mistake and then washes his hands. And I'm glad actually that someone asked that question, because if this is a lawyer who does this to you, there is no washing their hands. So understand, And this is a glitch on my little system here. I can't figure out how the heck keeps disappearing on me. But anyways, for bar, I'll tell you, if this is a lawyer and they attempt to wash their hands of your file, then you very, very promptly go to the law society and of that province for which they're registered, and you report them. And as a lawyer, I would hope with all of my might that person would suffer the most serious sanction in the world, because I want no lawyer acting that way it just brings our profession into disrepute. And, but I can't speak the same for other, if you choose to use someone who is not, is not a regulated consultant, you're on your own. And that's not only is that illegal itself, and then, I guess we hope with the Consultant Association that the steps they're taking to try to bring some teeth to their enforcement will help. But, it's tough. I
wonder if we should just chat a little bit about the Law Society disciplinary process, because I think a lot of people may not be aware of that. For our listeners who are not lawyers, the Law Societies are the provincial governing bodies for lawyers in each province and territory. And they are independent organizations that are run by groups of a mix of elected and appointed officials, some elected by lawyers, some appointed by government. And their interest is not to protect lawyers. Their interest is to protect the public. And they will throw lawyers under the bus to protect the public every time. And that's where we go back to that story I told at the beginning about the real estate lawyer. Every lawyer in BC paid $40 million in compensation because of that one lawyer's mistakes. And I wouldn't say we were happy to do it, but we believed it was the right thing to do. And that the law societies have real teeth to punish lawyers. And it doesn't happen very often, thankfully, but when lawyers really do screw up, the law societies really do act and compensate victims.
And when those errors are severe, even things, well, I shouldn't say even, because one of the things that the law societies are most protective of is trust funds and client money.
Yeah.
And even the smallest little, error in terms of management of that, and the monetary amount is almost irrelevant, I'll be honest. Yeah. You can't find 5 cents in your reconciliations, and the law society treats those things very, very seriously. But those mistakes, if they're serious enough, obviously if it's serious enough to have to compensate $40 million, that person is never practicing law again, ever.
In any province.
In any province, yeah. And so, that's one of the things that you have to understand when you do hire an immigration lawyer, that there is, you have certain expectations that are going to be met. And I'm going to pull Sandra on here. Oh, Sandra, she knows the story. She's living it. She says, grateful to Mark, who enlightened me that my consultant just exploited me for years. And Sandra, you are the only client. You're the only one, my dear friend, who was ever willing to come forward. And you know where that's at with the CBSA enforcement and everything. And I'm so delighted to see it moving forward. But, Sandy she's it. She's the only client, Kyle, that I've ever had in these circumstances who's willing to come forward, both for an employer and for a former representative. And so,
yeah, it takes a lot of
courage,
personal courage to do that, because you are investing in a lot of time and effort and loss of privacy and a lot of other things when you decide to really pursue these claims vigorously, especially if it's a matter that borders on criminal, where you have to go to the CBSA or the police about it.
Yes.
So yeah, we are really grateful as lawyers when people are willing to make that sacrifice in the public interest.
Yeah. I'm just going to pull up, Igor actually posted something here. Let's see if we can shrink this down just a little bit. It's kind of hard to read, but he said you should add a clause on on potential lawyers' liability in the Law Society of Alberta, or the client's liability in case of misrepresentation. So, what are your best practices and advice? Oh, I got to figure that out, why that's disappearing on me. Best practices and advice in doing so. Thank you. So, is there a way to limit, liability? And I think, obviously if the client is not telling you the truth, then liability isn't, going to flow to us. If unless we were somehow, we were somehow,
yeah, I think there can be cases where a representative might not be the source of a misrepresentation, but might not be very rigorous in questioning misrepresentations, and those are sort of cases where we could put ourselves at risk. I think it's always the best practice is to make your client ultimately responsible for every piece of information on every form and every online submission. Have something right in your retainer agreement that makes that clear, that they are the final word on any information that goes in. So I guess legal services agreement, I guess that's your retainer agreement. Absolutely.
Exactly.
We have that right in our retainer agreements. We talk about misrepresentation. We talk about the clients being responsible for their own information, and in our practices for having clients review and verify things, we build in mechanisms to make sure that they are taking responsibility for all that information.
Yeah, absolutely. And here's Sandra's last comment. She says, Service Canada is also moving forward. Everybody is happy. Yes, they are. Because it's not just an immigration
representative.
Yeah, it was a crazy situation, Kyle. We've got a consultant who owned a business, who employed people illegally, and and they didn't realize that not only are they liable to immigration and to the consultant authority, but also to Canada Revenue Agency and Service Canada, Employment Standards. So fun times, that's for sure.
Yeah, well, it's really heartening to hear that all of those agencies are actually getting engaged and actually using their enforcement power. So that's great.
Yep. Awesome. Well, I think we're just about at the end of our little live here. It was great having you join, Kyle, and to share this insight. I think this is valuable for, this one is as much directed to our colleagues and the other lawyers out there, not just immigration, but across the board and not even in our own country. It also relates to, it's this topic is, it crosses borders. So I appreciate you sharing this insight.
It's been a real pleasure, Mark. I hope that this gave our colleagues some comfort in how to deal with mistakes, and also some of the non-lawyers out there a sense of confidence in immigration lawyers and in what you get and how we're backed up when you hire a lawyer.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, in the description below, there is a link that you can connect with Kyle if you do need any assistance or help. As always, we love doing this and we love actually acting for people. So we're open for business. And if there is anything that we can do to help or support you in your immigration journey, no matter what it is, go ahead and just click on those links. So thanks so much, Kyle. It was great having you join me.
Thank you, Mark. Always a pleasure.
All right. Take care.
You too.
See you, everybody.